welcome back. Today we're going to do a full disassembly and reassembly of an RMX 1993 250. I'm also going to be going through checkpoints, torque specs, and we're just going to go through the bike in detail and bring it back to life. So I'm hoping you guys can learn something, and if you have any more questions, put in the comments. And the video is time-stamped, so if you only want to see the disassembly, hover over the bar, you can see that. If you want to see the power valve installation in detail or the clutch, etc., that's all marked out for you, and we'll get started. So throughout the disassembly, I'm not going to do too much talking and explaining much about the engine. There'll be a lot of talking in the reassembly aspect, but I will stop at certain points to talk through what I found, particularly with the piston and the cylinder. And this is just for anyone who's following the restoration series. But if you're just here to watch the engine get rebuilt and in detail, skip to the assembly part of the video. So the head does look quite clean. However, on the piston, you can see on the outsides there seems to be like marks or spots that don't have carbon on it. So I don't actually know what that is, but I'm pretty sure that means something's off. So if you know what it is, let me know in the comments. I'd love to learn more. So the piston is ruined on the exhaust side. It's very bumpy, very scratched, and you can see in the cylinder that it's scratched out some of the nickel plating. You can see that little dot there. And as we turn in different lighting, you can see that it's just scratched the cylinder. You can't really feel it, which is strange because those are some pretty big marks. But it looks like we're going to have to get a rebore or a polish, but definitely a new piston. We're not going to run with that one. But I guess we'll just keep going down the bike, see what else needs to be replaced. But if anyone knows what that is, please let me know in the comments, just so I can learn as well. Always great to see when you take off the first case that everything's clean, there's no dirt, and in that oil, as sludgy as it looks, there's no water, which is great. Because when we did the DT200 rebuild in the last series, there was water in the engine and it caused all kinds of problems. But this actually looks quite clean, so hopefully it's just a top end rebuild that we need. Of course, we'll do the gaskets while we're there, but we'll keep digging and see what else we can find. Another positive is none of these bolts are stripped. None of these look like... I don't think anyone's been in the engine recently anyway. I remember the DT series, there was stripped bolts. You could see that someone's been in there, but this looks really clean, so I'm hoping it's going to be at the bottom end. Here, unfortunately, I've stripped the bolt, which is really frustrating, but I always use an impact driver instead of an impact wrench. I find that it's more consistent and it's going to strip either way. So I'm going to leave that for now, and once the cases are apart, I'll get that bolt out. But yeah, unfortunately, that one was stripped. I mean, now that it's apart, you can see that there's a bit of rusting in there, which I'm sure isn't good, but I don't know how long the bike's sat. But at this stage, everything looks fine, with the exception of the piston and the barrel. So we've got to get a new gasket kit. Transmission all looked great. The gearing component, you'll see very shortly that I'll do some checks on it. Everything's fine. So it looks like it's just a top-end rebuild for the most part, but I'll also clean out those crank laces. It's only going to help at this point. We're also going to paint it with VHT paint. And if you like how it turns out at the end, let me know in the comments, and maybe I can do a video on painting motorbike engines at home, how to flame them, etc. And just before we start building, I just want to make sure everything's within tolerance. So we went through all the transmission. So here you'll see the gear shift fork thicknesses. 4.6 to 4.7. I was averaging above 4.6, under 4.7. Again, vernier calipers are plus or minus a little bit, so it was within range. And then after this, you'll see that I did the gear shift grooves. and the clutch plates, which you'll see everything's within range. So we'll use the original parts. Luckily, we don't have to order any more new parts. All of these values are coming out of the service manual that I have. Now, testing the clutch plates, everything was in thickness and variation. The only thing I didn't test is the plate distortion, which had to be above 0.01 mil. I just didn't have the tools to test it. But given that everything else hit the correct range values, I decided to use the original parts. But that was the only thing I didn't test for the clutch.
Now we're going to start rebuilding the bottom end. So we're going to start with the gear shifting mechanism, crank, transmission. Off camera I changed the bearings. So if you check over here, they were rusted and fried. So while it's apart, extra $100 to make sure the bearings are all good. I've also checked that the transmission and the gear select forks are within tolerance, which you would have seen earlier in the video. And then we'll slap on the gasket. Then after this we'll move on to the clutch and the other half of the engine. But for now, let's rebuild this. So I've had this in the oven at 100 degrees for 10 minutes. And I've had the crankshaft in the freezer just to make sure that they'll go in easily. So before I chuck that on, I'm just going to grease or oil this up. And these have already been oiled up earlier, so hopefully that just slips straight in, just like that. I always find this part the hardest to put in with the transmission. So
this isn't related to the RMX build in particular, but as you can see, I'm trying to spin it and it won't spin freely. Usually what this means, out of the times I've done it, is that the top gear is upside down. And I do this every time, and it always tricks me every time. So as you can see, use the diagram from the service manual and really go through it meticulously before you put it together, just to make sure every wash is in and every gear is the right side up. But that's just like a general thing. Don't put the cases on unless it can spin freely.
So now I'm going to put the gear selector in. I'm going to put this here. So that's when that goes in neutral, that'll turn on the green light on your dash.
I believe I got my gear selectors mixed up. So what I did was tested them all out, and I'm going to let you know what serial number goes where so you don't run into the same issue.
3B on the bottom to the right. 1B on the top to the right, and on the left it's 2A. And now we'll put it together.
Now, last check, you want to make sure you can spin freely, you're switching through the gears and everything's responding the way you want before you put the case on. And here everything checks out, so we'll start getting the gasket ready and putting the bottom end together. Here's a great example. I got it upside down. I had the gasket in, I put it together, and I had to redo it. So this is the right way up. Always good practice to have oil everywhere that oil needs to be, especially when you're putting it together. Just so when you first start the bike, there's not a lot of friction metal on metal, everything's well lubricated. I did find the crankshaft was getting in the way when I was doing the transmission, so it's good to know for future reference. I'll do transmission, then I'll put the crankshaft back in. I just had to reheat the cases and refreeze the shaft. So off camera, I just had to do a little bit of fiddling to get the cases together, but when it's together, I'm just gonna do a couple bolts at the top, at the bottom, at each side, just to have that even pressure, pull it together, and then I'll come around and do the rest of the bolts. So you'll see as I'm tightening this, I stop and make sure the crank still moves and that the transmission still moves. I found sometimes if you tighten it too hard against the torque specs, especially because I'm using an impact wrench, it can tighten it to the point where things don't move. And it's also a good check to make sure everything's in correctly. So when you're tightening it, just take a second to make sure things are still moving. Now that this side of the bike is coming together, I won't do the torque specs until I have the right side of the bike put together. So we'll come back to this later in the video.
Okay, now that the left side of the bottom end has been complete, it's time to fix the rest of it. So we've got the power valve, the main drive gear, along with the gasket for the bearing that I'll have to put on very shortly. You've got the Kickstarter, the idling gear, the gear selector mechanism, and then the water pump, and then you've got all the clutch assembly, which we've checked that these spring lengths are within tolerance and these widths are within tolerance, so we're just going to chuck it all back in together and have that bottom end complete before we start the top end.
For these two bolts, make sure you use lock thread. There's no torque spec, but lock thread them so then they don't come undone. If you want a more detailed breakdown of how this gear selector works, I'm going to put a video in the description. I found this guy explained it brilliantly. I can't explain it like he did, and I don't have the footage, but if you want to see that in more detail, check out the description. I would also recommend lock threading these bolts that have the arrows on it, because they don't have torque specs, but you don't want them to come undone.
So I finally have it on and it's finally working. So for example, it's easy with a gear stick, but that's moving now. So what I had to do was put a washer. I don't think I can see it there. Let me just get one here. I had to put a washer underneath there. Otherwise it would clamp down and hold that down. I've gone through the schematics. I haven't missed a washer. All the bearings are in, all the washers in the transmission are in. I thought it would just be a height clearance issue, but every time I tighten down those two bolts, it would not move, it'd just be jammed there. But now if I chuck this in, so now it works. So as you see, you have to line up the teeth in the middle, because when you go up or down a gear, you'll use every single tooth. It also sits into neutral. But yeah, I had to put a washer underneath there, and I don't know why. I've done everything as per the menu, but hopefully you guys don't run into that issue. It should all just go together fine. And make sure you thread lock these two bolts.
So now the gear selector's done. I wanted to do that first because that has the most potential for error if I had put the transmission in. Now I'm going to go power valve, drive gear, kickstarter, idling gear, clutch plates. That'll be the order that I'll finish this side of the case off with. And these two bolts for the power valve, make sure thread lock. Make sure every clutch plate has been pre-soaked in oil because that'll just help with friction when the bike first starts up. So with the face, you can see the rod sticking out in the middle there. You want the teeth to point to the back of the engine so that when you put the side case on, the clutch will work. And here I'm screwing it all the way in and then I'm undoing it by one rotation, the clutch. For the oil pump, I'm just going to put the plate on for now and I'll put the oil pump on when I put the bike together.
So now that the bottom end is together, it's time to do the top end. So what we've done is, I'll show you the bore in a second, but we've gotten a Pro X piston kit, obviously made to fit the ball. This one's 66.95. We've got new linkage, rings, piston, rod, gaskets, etc. So we're going to build the piston in a second. But what we've done on here is, as you can see, there's still a little bit of aluminium in there. And the reason why is that nickel plate has worn, and the little specks you see is actually aluminium. And the only way you can fix that is to get it replated. And there's only one place in Australia that apparently does that. But the guy mentioned, because we're not racing competitively or anything like that, he can buff and polish it. And because all the scratches are below the exhaust port, the rings don't go down that far, we should be fine. Again, it'd be better to replate it all together, but you know, $800 versus $200, it was kind of a no-brainer. And then we got the head and top flattened. I can't think of the other word for it. And the only thing that we have to keep in mind is there was a little bit of erosion there. So he recommends filling that little part with gasket, just so it has a better chance of just blocking it off altogether. And yeah, so that's what we'll do. So we'll chuck the piston on. As he said, there's a little letter on the top of one of these rings. They're identical, so I can put either one on. But because I'm using a GoPro, I can't actually zoom in there. But there's a small letter just on the left of that end. That means that that is right side up. So if there's a letter on the top of the piston, that's the side you want to face to the top. And then we'll line it up to the piston stops there and there and put it together. But happy how the bottom end turned out. Keen to put the top together, and then the engine should be done. So we'll get started now. So I've got the circlip on this side and the arrow is pointing this direction towards the exhaust pipe. So it's always easier to put one of these circlips on before you put it on. And then we'll just put the circlip on. I'll do that off camera because it's super fiddly. But before I do that, always just cover that. If you put the circlip on, it slips out and it falls down, it's better to catch it with a cloth of some sort. So I'll do that right now. So just off camera, I'm just putting some oil down the cylinder barrel. Again, less friction at this point, the better. So I'll do this off camera, but I'm pretty much putting it on, making sure that the rings are in the alignment zone, but I'm pretty sure it's not going to go on first go. It never does.
So as I put the cylinder nuts on, this is the diagram of which nut to tighten. So that's what we'll follow when we start to torque spec this thing down.
So time to put the head studs in. The longer one, there's one that's longer, goes here on the left side, because that will line up with that one, which sticks up just a little bit more than the rest of them. So just keep that in mind. Long one left, or say 9 o'clock.
So these head studs need Loctite to work. I'm pretty sure from the DT200 build, we torqued them to 12 Newton meters, I believe, or 12 foot-pounds. But I've got a special tool for that I can actually torque it. And then I leave it for 24 hours before I apply the head nuts, just to make sure that the lock thread has tightened. So the order I'm putting the head nuts on is the order I'm going to tighten it. And I'm just giving it a light tighten with the drill first, and then I'm going to come through and torque it properly. So I'm not using the impact driver at full speed, I'm just giving it a little bit of a touch as I'm tightening it down. Now we'll start assembling the power valve components, and I'm just following the diagrams for this one. So just rebuilding it based off the diagram and tightening it accordingly.
So next we'll clip the bracket at the back there. So this will clip in, and these two little spikes will go into those holes at the top. So we will thread lock it, just a dab.
And the two screws at the bottom, we're also going to thread lock those. So everything that holds the power valve in will be thread locked.
So I don't know if you saw it on the camera, but when I undid these three, they were falling out. They weren't in tight. So I don't think they thread locked it last time they took this apart. There we go. So that should, yeah, in and out, and that's not coming out. So next we'll get this rod and then go from there. So these two bolts here, just get the Phillips head, screw, thread lock, throw them in. And again, these were hand tight when I got here. So we want almost like the flat head to be on the right side and where it will screw in on the left. I've got a bit of oil running there, and we want this to sit like this. So that'll come in and connect there. So slide it through. Here you go. So the hardest part is just going to be getting this part here. I had a feeling that would happen. So I'll just fix this off camera so I'm not fiddling. But I'm just trying to push this through here, and this is giving me a bit of resistance. Okay, now that's through. We're going to line that hole up with there. And we're going to tighten this little attachment with some thread lock on it. So when this twists, this will pull these out. And then when it goes back in, it'll push them back down. So next thing on the magneto side of the case, I'm going to chuck this in. This, I'm going to get that to line up on the inside of it. Then we'll put this cap on the outside and this base plate on the outside. And then I'm going to do a little bit more research before I say this, but I'm pretty sure it's one full rotation and then you lock it down. So we'll jump to the engine and I will double check that rotation and we'll go from there. So here we go, we'll chuck this in there, and I did check, it is 1 full rotation. So I'm going to just put that in, that it sits in the gap. It sits in the gap. I'm going to turn it till it locks into that flathead screw. Next we're chucking this one in, and again we want to get that in the gap. What we're going to do is put this on before we rotate it, and it is 1 full rotation. Also going to thread lock them just because I don't think we want this coming undone, and there's no torque specs for it. So I'm going to screw it all the way in, then screw it out, twist the adjustment, and set and forget. So screw it all the way in, screw out a little bit, screw this at tension. So that's a half. And that's 1. Tighten. Wipe off the thread lock. Again, I don't know if thread lock is needed here or not. I just don't want that coming undone. And that's that side, and we've got one more side to go. Okay, last part. So the order is this, and that's going to sit with that facing down. Then we're going to get this spring and this little spacer, I'd say. Put that inside of it, and then you want that over this part. So I'm going to do that. Before I chuck it on, I'll get a flat head in a second, so it'll sit like that. After that, we'll have this on. Top it off with this, which will screw into it. And then we're going to have that off like that. And again, I'm going to put the diagram on the screen because that's going to be really hard to follow with the way I said that. But I'm hoping that'll make sense with the diagram, and you'll see me put it in. So we'll get started. And this is going to be impossible to see because I can't get a camera in there. I've got a GoPro. The lens isn't that good for close-ups. But let's see how far we can get here. I'm going to wiggle that around just so I know that that clips on. And this washer is going to clamp to keep it down. So I'm going to preemptively put that there now because I might not be able to reach later. So let's see if this actually does zoom in. You can see that washer there is pressed against that, so that's not going to come out now. And that was the main part of that washer. I'm going to do this off camera, but I'll put this back on there, put that there, and screw it in. We should be done. So I'll come back at the end. And that's how it looks fitted. So it wraps around the bottom there, and the metal part goes into. So this pointy part we want facing into the engine, link that into the plastic sleeve, and link this into that, and then screw down. So let's see if it goes on as easy as it sounds. Just place that little notch in between where that spring sits. So then when it turns, it pushes against the spring because that valve is going to push up. And if that pushes up, that'll twist that direction and open. So it'll twist that direction and pull the power valve, the exhaust valves out. So that twists clockwise. Then you remember you got that thing that holds there. When that clicks clockwise, it's going to pull out and those exhaust valves are going to come out. And then once we chuck this in, you'll see, once we let go of it, yep, so up, and once it lets go, the valves are out right now and the engine loses RPM, it'll come down. And that coil response there is because at the other side we wounded it up 1 rotation. So I'm hoping that makes sense, and I'm going to put some diagrams on the screen. If that doesn't make sense, let me know in the comments, because in the future I'd love to explain that better. It makes sense to me, but there's no point if you guys don't get it. So let me know what you think with that one. New gaskets, painted covers. Let's go, almost done. So the only thing left I have to do is to attach the water mount here, well, the tube that goes there, and that's it. But that was the top end and the bottom end. Definitely love some feedback if that was useful. Trying to be a little bit more thorough with each video and learn and get better camera angles and, you know, look at the algorithm, see where people have dropped off. But if you all have any feedback, please leave it in the comments and see where we go. For the final result, this is it. All put together, top end rebuilt, bottom end rebuilt. I used the VHT engine paint and it came up brilliantly. So yeah, really happy with this one. Excited for the rest of the project to be completed so I can ride it.
Again, thanks for watching. Any feedback's welcome. Let me know in the comment, and we'll see you the next episode. We have a couple of good bikes coming up, so stay tuned, subscribe if you like it, and see you soon.